content, often people will immediately think, oh, content is a blog. Or these days they sometimes go, well, it's a video series or it is a podcast. Ultimately, that's not true. They're just the channels for it. The content is the message. The content is what you're trying to communicate to your audience, to make them aware, to get them engaged and create that ongoing relationship with them.
Welcome to the Online Genius Podcast, where host and renegade-thinking beer-brewing lawyer turned online entrepreneur Bobby Klink proves that building and protecting your online genius doesn't have to be rocket science. Bobby and his expert guests break down online marketing and the legal stuff so you can stop sweating the small stuff and get back to building your amazing business. Now, here's your host, Bobby Klink.
Hey there, welcome to episode 63 of the Online Genius Podcast. I am your host, Bobby Klink, and I am really excited for today's show. A couple of reasons. Number one, now when I do interviews, I am actually doing these introductions after the fact. And so I'm recording this after I've already done the interview for today's show, and wow, is it a doozy. This week, we are talking all about content strategy, how to develop one for your business that's actually going to work and going to help you drive sales. And so we're talking about a topic that is hugely important. We're getting some great information about it. And it's really, I think, has so many wonderful tidbits of gold that you can take the information in this week's episode, apply it to your business, and see some immediate results. So that makes me happy. But before I tell you about this week's guest, as always, this episode is brought to you by the Online Genius podcast community on Facebook. Now, I love coming to you here. I love talking to you through this podcast, but I prefer back and forth two-way conversations. And we can't really do that here on the podcast. That's what the podcast community is for. You go there, it's a Facebook group. I'm there. We're talking. We're going to talk about the various topics that are on the podcast, but also I can answer the questions you have about the legal stuff. So it's kind of a really great place to hang out with other like-minded entrepreneurs who really want to do it the right way. And you can join absolutely free by heading over to youronlinegenius.com/community. Again, youronlinegenius.com/community. Now I want to talk about today's show. Today's guest is my friend, Jillian Bowen. Now, Jillian is the person who's helped me develop my content strategy. And she really helped me by helping me kind of focus on the right things, etc. At the moment I'm going through, she has a new course that's kind of in beta testing. I'm going through it. It's fantastic. So I can't say high enough things about her. Now, Jillian is a content and social media strategist who spent the last 15 years creating campaigns initially for multinational, international companies, and now as a consultant for small to medium businesses. So one of her courses, or kind of one of her online content strategies, attracted attention from publisher Wiley that converted into a book. She's got a ton of awards, including Content Marketing Institute Awards and the Content Council Gold Award for Best Content Strategy. So she actually knows what she's talking about. Now, in 2018, she became a Canva ambassador, which is a pretty prestigious thing as well. But she currently pays the bills as a freelance copywriter and digital marketing consultant, but is actually slowly transitioning to the world of course creation. I mentioned she has that. She recently launched the Content Strategy Lab, which is fantastic. I'm going through it. It's wonderful. So, when we talk to Jillian and when you listen to her, I want you to actually listen to kind of all the different insights she has. I enjoyed this interview because first of all, we have a great rapport. Jillian and I go back and forth, and so I think it was a lot of fun, which I think comes through and you'll enjoy. But she and I really have a similar view of the role of content, although we differ in places, and you'll hear that. But she gives so much value that you're going to get so much from listening to what she has to say. So without further ado, here's the episode with Jillian. Welcome to the show, Jillian. I'm so excited that you're here.
Oh, Bobby, I am incredibly excited to be here. I have been listening to your podcast from pretty much the beginning. So to finally make it onto that list It is my moment. It is my 2019 woohoo moment.
So we're going to start out with you being cheeky, huh? Right from the beginning, huh?
It is impossible not to have me being cheeky, I'm afraid. Welcome to the crazy Australian personality.
So listeners, the backstory to this is that Jillian and she's good at kind of, how do you say it? Basically knocking me down a peg. How do you say it in Australia?
I'm going to get everyone who doesn't like a minor cuss to block their ears.
Okay, go ahead now.
We call it taking the piss.
Yeah. So she's good at doing that. She doesn't want to let my head get too big in spite of my caricature. But with that, Jillian, I'm excited to talk about content strategy. And listeners, if you haven't been listening to me that long, if you're relatively new, I've kind of talked about my evolving content strategy, and Jillian helped me develop mine. So I wanted to bring her on instead of, my butchered version of explaining it. So that's why she's here. I'm excited to talk to her. But as you know, Jillian, I always ask my guests about something interesting about them personally. And you shared, I got to say, the most interesting fact that anyone has ever shared with me about your first love. I need you to tell my listeners that story.
I am absolutely digging a hole for myself with this one, but I'm going to go with it because, you've got to follow through. I confessed to Bobby in a moment of weakness that my first love was actually a Russian stripper I met in New York when I was 23 years old. Now, I didn't tell him the entire story because that would get even weirder, but I was a young'un, a little Australian Australians are very adventurous, generally speaking. And I decided I wanted to go to New York. And I got on a plane on my own. Thank you, Qantas. Flew me there. I think it took about 24 hours. I got off the plane at around 7 o'clock at night, and I nearly died. I was petrified. This was the 90s in New York. I got in a very dodgy car to my hotel that was in a very, very dodgy part of New York. And I went up to my room, and it was not a nice room. And I sat on the bed and went, I'm here for 10 days. I wonder if I can get food delivered to my room for 10 whole days because I ain't leaving this room. Anyway, ultimately, the next day, I realized, this was crazy. I had to do this. And I decided I was going to venture out and I was going to go to the Empire State Building because I figured if I was in New York and I could only manage one thing to get my courage up, at least I was going to go to the top of the Empire State Building, fulfill a dream, and then I'd come back and lock myself in my room again. So I get in what we call the lift. You call it what, the elevator?
Elevator.
Yes, elevator. And there are these two guys there. And one of them looks at me and goes, are you okay? And I went, oh my God, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. And I went, yes, I'm okay. And he went, do you need us to call someone? And I just went, this is really strange. And I went, no, why? And he went, look, you've clearly run away from home. I'm like, I'm sorry. And he said, well, what are you, 16? And I was just like, oh my goodness, this person thinks I'm 16 years old. I ran away from home to New York. He had this really, really heavy Russian accent. I had an Australian accent. Clearly, both of us had no idea about the other person. And I looked at him and said, I'm 23 years old. And he went, oh, it's okay. And he said, you just look so scared and you looked so young and we wanted to help you. And I think I was just a little bit overwhelmed by that moment of kindness. And I probably had a little bit of a heartbeat skip. And, these two guys, I ended up looking after me in New York. And as it happens to be, my New York heroes and ultimately my first love were illegal in America and sadly removing their attire to earn cash.
So, Jillian, I think I can officially end this entire podcast now. And I don't just mean this episode. I mean the whole podcast. I mean, there is no way I'm going to top that story, ever.
Well, the sad thing is that it wasn't meant to be. Obviously, he was illegal in America, so I couldn't go there to stay with him. I was in Australia, and so he couldn't come to Australia and stay with me. So, it was the first love of my life. And interestingly enough, we stay in touch still today. And without giving away how much I've aged over the years, obviously that was the 90s. So it just goes to show that even when you're incredibly scared and incredibly overwhelmed and think that you've bitten off more than you can chew, sometimes if you look around, there'll be someone there that will actually extend a hand and look after you. So have courage and give it a go.
Well, I think that is a great lesson to have taken from that story. So listeners, take that lesson and enjoy the story for what it is. It's just a fun story too.
Plus, can I just say he was seriously hot. I missed out on a long-time investment there.
Oh, Jillian. Okay, I think that's enough lightheartedness. I think it's time to move on to why we're here, which is to talk about a content strategy and creating a content strategy and a content plan. And now the headline is probably loops, which we're going to get to. And people have heard me talk about this before, but the concept is that your content needs to be loops, not funnels. That we're going to get to. But first, I want to talk about a broader point, which is when you're creating a content strategy, how should it fit in with your overall business plan or kind of the business model that you're running?
Look, this should be such a natural thing for people. It's often not, but your content strategy absolutely has to align to your goals. And I think the problem that has occurred is everyone's hearing people say, you must create content every week, create content consistently. And they've got so focused on doing that, they've skipped that important why step. Why are you creating the content? What is the content actually achieving for your business? So my big, I'm on my soapbox moment with people is saying, stop, hold on. Why are you creating that content? And the answer always has to be because it aligns back to my goals. When I say that, I don't mean that it has to sell all the time because your goals aren't all about selling. They're about awareness and engagement as well. But each piece of content you create, when you have a strategy, the strategy helps you make sure that that path back to a goal is always firmly in place.
Yeah. And so listeners, you've heard me talk about this. I mean, when I did my content strategy, I gave you tough love and I said, you need to be creating regular content. But I do want to agree with Jillian in this. It's better that you create less content that is better rather than more content just because you've heard that you have to do it. And let me give you my personal story on this. Before I was actually had my...
Hold on. Is there a stripper in the story?
No, there is not a stripper as far as I know, but there might be. I mean, I'm not sure.
All right, I'll give you a chance.
It's the story of how I did like what now I consider the cardinal sin of content creation. I had my law firm and I knew, hey, you're supposed to have a blog. You're supposed to have regular content. You're supposed to be doing this and it's going to get you SEO and it's going to get you all this. But I was never good at doing it. And I still don't blog regularly. Like if you go to Your Online Genius, you'll see I've got videos, which now I have someone helping me kind of repurpose the videos. And I have these podcasts. But getting me to actually sit down and write blog posts, it's just never going to happen. So what do you think I did, Jillian? That's the cardinal sin.
You probably just created as much as you could, put it out there all the time, didn't think about what it was there for.
What could I have done that's even worse than that?
Not had a stripper in the story.
I didn't write it myself. I just paid someone one of these services that would just write stuff for you. And think about this for a second. I was an intellectual property lawyer at the time, trying to get a random online, people to write content about them. So it's just, I look back at that stuff and it's just ridiculous. It's not my voice. It has nothing about me. Yeah. And it was just, I've got to have a regular blog every week. So I'm going to pay these people to do it.
Do you know what? That brings us to an interesting definition point. And that is something that I find people don't always think about. What is content?
Well, why don't you start with that? What is content?
Okay. Well, content, often people will immediately think, content is a blog. Or these days they sometimes go, well, it's a video series or it is a podcast. Ultimately, that's not true. They're just the channels for it. The content is the message. The content is what you're trying to communicate to your audience, to make them aware, to get them engaged and create that ongoing relationship with them. How you put it out there, the actual format, that's secondary. So people get really caught up in the fact that, I've got to have a blog or I've got to have a podcast. Do you know what? All you have to do is find a way to start with to be communicating regularly with your audience in a quality format. Now, that could be via a newsletter. That could be via a Facebook Live. You don't have to achieve everything at one time, and you don't have to use a content format that doesn't feel right for you.
Yeah, I think that is great. I was just having this conversation in my mastermind. I can't share who was saying what, but there was a discussion. Someone was asking, is there anyone in here who's not doing like a regular, and they were talking content in, the sense of blog, podcast, something like that, and it got this lively discussion. And some people point out, well, I don't do that, but I do have content because they are creating regular content on social media, and that's how they're connecting, and that's how they connect with their audience. And I think that's an important point, that ultimately content is just a way to have a regular connection and a set of communications with your audience, however you choose to do that.
And, there's a formal structure to that we'll talk about, and that's where the looping comes into play. But it's exactly that. It is a connection. And I really worry that people get put off by content because they feel that sense of pressure. Because, yes, the end game would be to have a primary piece of content each week, which might be your blog, your podcast, your video. Support that with Facebook Live, support that with social media posts. So you've got this real loop of content that moves people around in your overall universe. But that's a goal. That's something you work towards. And if you just start with one thing that you feel incredibly comfortable doing and do that in a really quality way consistently, you're a content producer. You've got your strategy started. It really is as simple as just taking a small step.
Yeah. And I think there was something you said in your previous answer that we should also really kind of put a pin in it, that we should really get out this nugget. And that's, you need to find a form of content creation that is right for you. And
absolutely.
That's why I don't blog, because I'm not going to do it. I can get on and I can talk to someone like Jillian, or I can actually get on and do Facebook Live. I don't do Facebook Live, but shooting videos. I mean, at one point I batched 14 quick tip videos in a matter of a couple hours. So that is easy for me to do. Look, I talk a lot. That's fun for me. I'm a lawyer. I like to hear myself talk. So what can I say? But that I think is important, is understand your personality and what's going to work for you. Because if it's not going to work for you, you're not going to do it. You're not going to follow through, and it's going to be a nightmare. But so I do want to follow up on this. You were talking about figuring out how it's going to fit in with your overall business plan. I mean, do you have to think about what you sell? And by what you sell, I mean the kind of thing you sell, or does that not really matter when you're thinking about a content strategy? Meaning, I sell courses versus I'm a coach versus I sell templates. Does that really affect your content strategy?
Look, to some extent it does. I I would probably describe it as you have to think about your product, service, or offer, because some people don't actually sell as such. And I'm thinking of people in the not-for-profit space, and they're definitely out there as well. Sometimes it's more about relationship building, but product, service, offer, you need to think about that from the point of view of, and Bobby, you and I went through this, which of those is your primary focus? You need to choose one to start with and say, this is the product, service, or offer that actually is most likely to work with my audience. So that is where I'm going to start my focus point. This is, as they say, the really easy one to get. And if you try and put something out there that's too big, too challenging, for example, if you had a signature course and you made that your focus point at the start, it's too big. You want easy wins with your audience. You want ways to incorporate a business goal that's going to make you money, but make it really easy for them to come on board with it.
Right. And listeners, just so you know, later this year, I'm going to go through a whole series where we're going to I'm going to have experts come in and talk about all of these different ways that you can monetize. And I think that's important. As I sit here now, I kind of wish I would have done that first, because when I think about it, at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. I mean, that you can't start anything else until you know what you're going to sell.
Absolutely. And I think, for me, I came out of the corporate world very recently and went back into my own business. Mm-hmm. And as I was getting up to that transition, I was blogging regularly, doing social content regularly, but I had no product. So I thought I was being really, really clever because I was building this amazing, engaged, really fantastic audience. But because I didn't yet have a product, actually going back and retrofitting that into my strategy was complicated. And it just didn't have a natural place. Whereas if you start with that product, and I'm just going to call it a product to make it easy right now. If you start with that front of mind and think, okay, this is what I do, and you absolutely check that guilt feeling that you shouldn't be selling to people, because we've all got it. We've all been there. Mm-hmm. This is not about being a slimy salesperson, but you're a business. So you need to think about how you make money first and foremost before you create your content.
Yeah, and it's so funny. I think I've told this story. I don't know if I've told you this, Jillian, but when I first was trying this whole online business thing, my first plan was to launch a course. But the course was very much focused to the people I serve now, of information product people selling courses, coaches, those kinds of people. But I was working with Facebook ad agency. And so it's not really content, but it's similar, because I had this freebie, and the freebie was, and I still have it somewhere, but it was how to get stock images legally for your business. Mm. And the Facebook ads people, they were just so intent on getting the cheapest leads. They ended up basically getting me a bunch of leads of people who had a photography interest. Well, those are not the people who are going to buy my product.
Absolutely not.
You have a mismatch like that, it's not going to work. And the same thing is true with your content. If you're creating content that is relevant, to subject one, it's going to be a problem if you're ultimately going to be selling to subject two. So you need to figure out who your niche is, create content for them. And it's funny that we're having this conversation today, Jillian, because we're having this interview while Amy Porterfield is doing in the middle of her launch of the Digital Course Academy? Yeah.
Digital Course Academy.
Yeah. So her new signature course about creating a course. And Jillian and I are both in it. We've both
it's amazing.
We've been in Amy's world forever. So, we're both in it. And then, so in the Facebook group, someone came in there and said, basically, I've got all this expertise. Here's what it is, but I don't really know what kind of course to create. What do you guys think I should teach? And I said, well, wait a minute. Let's start with, who do you want to serve? That's kind of the first question. Yeah. And once you figure that out, you can start to figure out, okay, here's who I'm going to serve. Here are their problems. And then I think everything kind of flows easily from there.
It does. Look, when I teach content strategy, the absolute first thing I teach is audience profiling. Now, everybody's got a different name for that. There's ideal customer, you name it, personas. You'll hear lots of different names for it. You know, in my own course, I have this line that I open with saying, when it comes to life, there's only one thing I really dislike more than going to the dentist, and that's audience profiling. The fact that I do it and I do it first tells you how important it is.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, it always starts with the why. And whatever you're doing, no matter where you're doing it in the online world, I would say to you, put the word why in front of you before you do anything, and that will clear out a lot of these problems anyway. But it is saying, number one, why does this person need me? It's not about your product at that point. It is about what is their problem or need that you're going to solve. Now, in your own mind, you know what your product or service is, but you're trying to find out from your audience, what is it from their perspective? Because it is about the audience first, not about you.
Yep. And I think, and let me tell listeners, and I think maybe listeners have heard me say this before, but you can kind of think of it as, what is your elevator pitch? What do you say you do? And that will give you a clue. So, and it will help shape a lot of your decisions. So I say, I'm a lawyer and online entrepreneur, and I help other online entrepreneurs get their legal protection in place quickly, easily, and affordably. And then I go on to say, so they can build their business and set up. But when you think about that, because my core is quickly, easily, and we can leave off affordably, but just quickly and easily, that kind of tells you I shouldn't be offering them something that is a long, drawn out process. I need to just get them the solution as quickly as possible. And
absolutely.
That then is, and again, you guys have heard me talk before about how I made the shift to only selling templates. That's because of Jillian. She helped me realize this. And, you know, you go through.
It's funny, when you talk to me, you're a little more brutal in your language about what I did.
No, look, I mean, it was one of those things where I was like, you know, where you're shaking your fist at somebody, but you're like, no, they're right. And that was what you did for me because, you know, I mean, and I've told this story. I did it in my planning. You've heard me talk about it, listeners. I mean, I looked at the numbers after she said it, and she intuitively knew what the numbers told me, which was I should be selling templates. I should not be selling courses and memberships and all this complicated crap. I should just sell templates. And, you know, so, but the point is, when you go back and realize your why and your audience's why, it's going to answer a lot of those questions for you.
Look, it absolutely does. And it makes it a lot simpler to do. The one thing I will say there is I have seen people get stuck on this audience part of the equation, not even just for weeks or months. I've seen people a year later in some of the groups that Bobby and I are in, still coming up and going, hey, I think I've just come up with my ideal customer, or I'm still working on my ideal customer. It's like, please, people, no. Number one, this is going to change and change and change again. So you don't have to perfect it the first time you do it. Just start. And then treat it as part of your everyday business. Do not spend, when I teach it, I actually tell people 15 minutes. That's all you get the first time on your audience profile. 15 minutes. Yeah. And then print it out, stick it on your wall, keep it in front of you. And then as you talk to people or as you go into Facebook groups, you are going to learn more and you add to it as it goes.
Yeah, but look, I think what you're talking about with a lot of people, they get stuck on it because I've now come around to the notion that a lot of that is a mindset issue. There's something else that is stopping them from taking action. And people ask me all the time how I get so much done. And it's because I just do. I just do it. You know, it's kind of like, okay, you know, I don't let a worry about, is this perfect? Do I have it 100? I'm like, no, I mean, let's just do it and see what happens. And, you know, I think we could all learn from the startup world, the tech startup world, where there's the concept of the minimally viable product. And that's basically come out with the basic thing and then iterate. And I think that's what we all need to do in our business.
Look, when you're doing this audience profiling, that's actually a really important part of it because it's almost a checkpoint. As you're actually thinking about your audience, the one thing you should be thinking about with them is this person you're describing. Are they a thinker, a starter, a doer, or a finisher. And if, as you're putting that person together, you select either a thinker or a starter, you need to rethink your audience, because this is not just about the people that are doing this. It's also about your audience. If you're targeting people that are thinkers or starters, there's a good chance they're not going to be the best customer for you. You are looking for people that are doers and finishers, like Bobby, or you need to be looking at that in yourself, asking yourself, am I a doer? Am I a finisher? And if you're not there yet, ask yourself, why not?
Yeah. And again, I push people constantly. You know, I have a good friend in the online space who I am constantly pushing her. I say, hey, I want you to come out with something and ask people to pay you. I don't care what it is. Just do it. And then from there, you can improve. Doesn't have to be perfect the first time, but, you know, at some point you got to do it. And again, I've told the story the first time I asked people, they looked at me and said, you're nuts. You know, I sold one course and the woman asked for a refund without ever looking at it. So, you know, things like that happen and it's okay, but take action. So
I think we've all got a friend like that too. And in some ways, people don't often change, but I have to say for a long time, I was a starter, and a lot of that came from shiny object syndrome. I love ideas and coming up with ideas excites me probably more than just about anything. It's that next stage, that hard work of doing and finishing, it's when it loses its gloss. And the real danger at that point is, if you're an ideas person, it's really tempting to let one of those ideas that's floating around you suddenly take over. And then you forget what you were working on and go, oh, but I'm going to do this now, because it makes you feel really good. It's the same thing. You know, if you eat chocolate, you're going to feel better than if you eat salad. In most cases, you're always going to be attracted to the fun thing, the thing that's exciting you. And I created a system for this with me that helped me a lot, called a back burner. And it's not mine completely. I've got it from somebody else somewhere along the way. But when I have a shiny object, I don't ignore it, because that doesn't work. But I have a back burner list or a back burner notebook, and I put it in there. And with your back burner, you go back to it. It's there for a reason. And, you know, one of the ways you can do that is to actually make a ritual of it, where once a month you get a glass of wine or do something that you really enjoy, pull out your back burner list and go through it again and see if something has become interesting or not. Just don't do it every day.
I love that you're saying once a month, because when we first talked, you told me I could have a day a week to do it. But, you know, I call that my squirrel list. It's the same. It's from the movie Up. And I'm just like, okay, that, you know, I've got write a book on there. I've got some other things on there. I've got some courses on there. I've got a bunch of things on my squirrel list, but I think it's valuable to do that. But we can also always take lessons. If you look at the truly successful entrepreneurs out there, they do the same thing over and over and over again, for a while at least. They perfect it, and then they move to the next thing. And so, you know, that's why we talked about, Jillian pushed me on this. I am focusing 2019 on selling templates. That's all I'm doing. I have some other ideas about how to market and how to do things like that, but I'm selling templates. That's it. And so I think that kind of focus will help. And then it drives your content strategy, right? I mean, that knowledge for me makes it very easy to understand the conversations I need to be having with my audience. Is that right?
Absolutely. And, you know, you are, when you're from every point of it, when you're planning, when you're executing, at all times you're starting to think, okay, how does this then connect with my audience, make them aware that templates are my thing? How does it help them engage with me on the topic of templates? And how does it help them take action? And that creates that more organic, natural relationship, rather than that old-fashioned funnel attitude to people where you treat them like sheep and you push them all through to an endpoint.
Yeah. Well, and I think I've shared this with the audience. I mean, I have a VA in place now who is working on helping me get all this organized. And as we're recording this, I'm hoping the following week is going to be the first week that I will be releasing these quick tip videos. But, you know, because this podcast is not all about templates, it's about all kinds of things, because I like talking about all these things, I decided to add quick tip videos, and they're not all about templates, but they're all about helping you understand things that are relevant for written agreement. So you can kind of see how it kind of fits in to my content strategy and or into my sales strategy. And so that's another example of knowing what you sell is going to directly affect, what you're going to end up creating from a content perspective.
Look, otherwise you are engaging in a very expensive hobby, and hobbies are great. I have a travel blog that I write. It is solely a hobby. But I know it's that way. If you are creating content as part of a business, it needs to earn you money.
Yep, that's right. And again, you can have your, I don't want to say vanity, but your, things that you just do for fun. Again, I'm going to have some people on this podcast that aren't going to fit squarely within one of my content pillars, but most of it is going to fit within my overall plan. So I think that's the way to look at it. And while I do that, that's probably a good way to transition. I mentioned content pillars, which is a concept that you helped me think about. Why don't you explain what that means?
I'm going to give it a couple of different names here for people to have context. In the Google world, you would call it topic clusters. You can call it content pillars. You can call it content hubs. Ultimately, it's categories. It is taking a category and really looking at it from a top level. So, Bobby, in your world, I think one of the examples we came up with was websites.
Yep.
That's the top level. And then that becomes your content pillar or your topic cluster. And then you create ideas that sit under that then get into the specifics of that. It's an amazing way, to keep you on track, because the reason you identify that topic pillar is because it aligns to your business goal. So, Bobby, in your case, we talked about websites because websites need templates for privacy, terms and conditions, all of that stuff that Bobby knows better than I do. I do have them all, thanks to Bobby.
Yeah, and the one she didn't mention is a disclaimer. So, yeah, she's right. It's those three documents.
I am not a lawyer, but I have them because of Bobby, and they fit into my website. So you can see how there's that natural alignment between the product, which are the templates, topic of website. So if you're creating a website, you actually need those on there. That's just par for the course these days. So there's a natural fit, and that alignment has immediately taken place between your business goal and the overall topic pillar. And then as you go through, you can then really make sure that you're creating content about websites, and that goal is already in place. So you don't have to worry every single day, is this aligning? But because you've created these big categories, you know that your goal is already entrenched right from that first planning point. And it also helps your content. This is stepping away from all of that for a minute. I often say to people, because people go, wow, why do you need this? Well, it's great for Google, obviously. It's great for goal alignment. But take a step back to traditional content. So remember the days when we used to get an actual printed newspaper, and I actually can't remember the last time I got a printed newspaper or bought a magazine.
Funny story about that. I still get the Sunday Washington Post, but the only reason I never read it. It drives my wife nuts because it'll sit out there forever. The only reason I do is it's cheaper to get the print copy, which comes with the digital edition, than to just buy the digital edition.
It's exactly the same in Australia. You know what? It's really funny. I think a lot of people do that. I think there's something, I did it for quite a while too, even when digital pushed over, is that Sunday newspaper really felt like the one that I actually wanted to sit down and actually put my hands on and look through.
Yeah.
But back to the reason I was describing that, when you pick up a newspaper or you pick up a magazine, it's got a structure to it. Now, imagine if you picked up a newspaper and the sport was mixed in with the comics, and that was mixed in with the news, and it would drive you crazy. The whole point of that, the reason that you find it easy to consume the content, is because they've given an order. So you can sit there with that newspaper and you can pull out the sports section and give it to one person, and the features section and give it to the other person. It's exactly the same principle when you're creating online content in any way. The more you give it a structure of actually explaining to people, broadly speaking, this is what this group is about, they're going to consume more of it.
Yeah, and I think that makes perfect sense. They're going to consume more of it. Plus, people are naturally going to say, okay, I like this one. I want to read this other stuff that's related. And ironically, it wasn't necessarily one of my actual normal pillars, but I had something happen. It was in December. Somebody on my list listened to one of it. And it was like, I think it was like the second to last of the planning series that I did. And because it was related to other things, he sent me an email at some point, almost cursing my name, halfway joking about how he started listening to that one, but then I referenced the one before. So he thought, oh, I need to go back to that one. And then in the one before, I referenced the one before. So he ended up, I think, going back and listening to binge listening to 6 episodes because he kind of understood that they were, think of it as a story arc. They kind of all fit together. And a pillar can do that too. And it can help that same kind of thing.
And that's sort of where we got to that point of talking about looping. It is about creating a really natural path that your customer or your audience moves on. You're making it so easy for them to do that. And, they just naturally, because you've attracted them with information that they wanted, and that engagement starts to build because you can see the next piece that's connected and the next piece that's connected. And exactly the example you just gave is you've made the journey for them incredibly easy. If you don't put up roadblocks, people tend to keep moving.
Yeah. And by the way, actually, as you were talking, I was thinking, I lied when I said that didn't fit into my pillars. Actually, every one of those episodes almost certainly fell into one of my pillars. Because in one of them, I talked about my content strategy. And one of them, I talked about my promotion plan and promotion strategy. So it did actually fit into my pillars, broadly speaking. It was kind of the first time that I did an arc where I wasn't doing a theme all within one pillar. I was kind of jumping from pillar to pillar, but within my own business and giving people advice on how to do it. So, I think I had to correct that because I wrongly said it wasn't right.
Pillars do cross over at times. 2 of my pillars are obviously content and social media, and there's a natural crossover between them. And it's all about, putting up the pathways so that the audience can see them and follow them. They won't always go down that path, but unless you create the pathway and show it to them, there's a pretty good chance they won't move at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's right. And so the more you can do that, again, just that story, I think, of that person emailing me is a perfect example of the looping concept that, that I think you were trying to get to, which is the more you can get people just so that they're going to come in and circle around and get a lot of your content, consume a lot of your content, get your freebies, do all those things, the better, right?
Absolutely. Look, there's a few people talking about this these days, so lots of different names for it. Interestingly enough, some of the models that I've seen emerge really recently have a very similar concept, but they put the audience in the middle and they have, the content in many ways rotating around the audience. I don't do it that way.
That doesn't make sense to me. To me, I think the audience is in the loop kind of going around.
Absolutely. To me, that's exactly it as well. It concerns me just having that audience sitting there with things kind of happening around them. I get why they've done it that way visually in some senses, because they're trying to say, look, it's all about the audience. It's all concentrated on the audience. To me, what sits in the middle of your loop that you create is actually your conversion, whatever that might be to your business. That is what sits at the center. That's what holds it all together, is the business goals. They sit in the middle. They're the reason for being. They're your foundation. And around them, there are the points that I call awareness, engagement, and action. And by action, I don't just mean sales. I mean, that's when someone might, sign up to your mailing list. It's when you get someone to really take a step forward with you. And what happens is that your audience or your customer enters the loop and moves around it. So at different times, they might be in awareness mode because you've introduced them to something you do or a topic that you talk about that they weren't aware of. They might be in engagement mode because you've encouraged them to join your Facebook group or to add a comment. They've actually started to connect with you and have that two-way conversation, or they get to action where they join a mailing list, or they may actually purchase something. ultimately, though, they're moving around according to their needs, according to their why. And you are just sitting there with your conversion in the middle saying, whenever you're ready, I'll catch you.
Yeah, but I do want to push on that a little bit. Although that's true, you have to remember you are the expert. So you need to lead them. I mean, look, there are some people who they'll come into your world and they'll know what they need and they will just go straight to the conversion. But often what you're doing with your content is coaching to the conversion by taking them through the proper kind of journey. Is that part of what your content should be doing?
Absolutely. And it is it's very hard for them to see. And that's a great thing. And I'm going to throw in, I love a good analogy.
Me too.
I often talk about content and content strategy like a duck. You know, you see a duck on the water and it looks so graceful and beautiful and it's gliding across the water. That's your content. That's what your content looks like to the world. It's just beautiful, simple, moving under the water. Your content strategy is that duck's feet paddling away like crazy, keeping it all going. No one can see it. Thank goodness, because it can get ugly at times. No one can see that content strategy under there. But that's exactly what you were getting at there, Bobby, is the content strategy is that activity that happens where they can't see it, that keeps them moving, that keeps the duck gliding across the water.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not supposed to be sharing all this with my listeners because I'm telling them all about my legs going under the water. But hey, I'm kind of radically transparent about these things, so it is what it is. So once you've kind of defined your hubs or pillars or whatever you want to call it, and it fits within your business strategy, then what's the next piece you need to be doing?
There are two pieces that come next, and they're equally as important. One thing that you do need to do here is think about your channels, and that's where that comes into play. So before you start creating content, it's really important to think about what we talked about earlier is where does your comfort fit? So thinking about, am I a writer? Am I a podcaster? Am I going to do video? What is that? How am I going to start out? That's actually the point you need to think. You need to decide what those channels are going to be. You need to be realistic and not plan for too much, particularly at the beginning. But you need to think about where you're going to put it and what that looks like. Because once you've got that, then you can get into the idea generation. And that's what sits underneath those content topic hubs that we're talking about.
Okay,
and
wait. I want to highlight that point, and I want to be very clear about this for listeners. You, especially if you're in the online space, which I'm sure you are listening to my podcast, you are going to be bombarded with experts who say, you've got to be doing this. You've got to be doing that. Don't listen to any of them. Okay?
Yay!
If it doesn't fit with you, look, there are all of these strategies, but the problem is if you try to do all of them, you're not going to do any of them well. You're probably not going to end up doing any of them. But more importantly, you're going to be so distraught that you're not living up to what you think you should be doing. And so again, find what works for you. If you hate video, don't listen to the people who talk about how you've got to be doing Facebook Lives because that's what Facebook loves. If you're not going to do it, if you're going to sit there and just freak out about it and worry about it, don't freaking do it.
No. And, the thing is that the chances are that you will maybe work up to it over time.
Yeah.
Find the place that you feel comfortable in as your start point. Find the place where you actually enjoy what you're doing and keep an open mind about where you go from there, but don't feel pressured. Do not listen. As Bobby said, do not listen to anyone else. The only thing I want you to listen to is us.
because we're telling you to do what's right for you. I mean, it's
absolutely.
It's kind
quality.
of like,
is all it counts here, quality and consistency. Then start with quality.
Yeah.
If you're going to start with one thing, start with quality. And then you want to get into the consistency. And look, it depends what you're doing and in what space, and it depends what your audience wants as well. Like you hear these people say, oh, it's once a week here, and you've got to do this on Facebook this many times a week and Instagram this times a week. Well, I'm sorry to break it to everyone, but your audience are not all Stepford wives. We each have our own audience. They have different needs. You are going to be listening to them, I hope, for the entire journey that you're on with them. And you need to adapt your timing according to what they want as a broader group. They'll tell you, if they don't want to get a newsletter twice a week, you'll see that they'll stop engaging with it. You'll find that sweet spot works for them and works for you. And if you try and determine that right at the beginning, because everyone said you had to do it this way, you're just setting yourself up for A, misery, B, probably failure, because it's going to become so overwhelming. You won't enjoy it and you'll give up. You'll do something else. And it's so easy to give up. It's probably the number one reason content fails is because people give up.
Yep.
Actually, probably it's because they don't have a content strategy. But the number two reason is they give up.
Well, but so let me since we like analogies, I'm going to make an analogy kind of in the same space, but there are like 15 different ways you can launch a product. You could go with a challenge, a webinar, a product launch formula, the videos, an email launch. I can't think of all the other ones. No one would think, I need to do all of those for a single launch. No, you'd say, I'm going to pick one, or maybe, like a challenge, for example, people will use a challenge leading into one of the others, but you're not going to try to do everything. So your content is kind of like your launch strategy. You have to find what works for you, what feels right for you, and
your audience.
Yeah, and your audience. I mean, it has to be something that will fit your audience, and then from there. So I stopped you to go down in this digression, and I'll get off my soapbox now.
We love a good soapbox.
Yeah, but so you were starting to talk about then coming up kind of with topics under whatever. And so why don't you talk about that for a second? How do you go about that process?
Well, that's where your ideas come in. And the reason I wanted you to look at your channels first is because this is where we get a few efficiencies into what we're doing. So you've decided where you might want to create. And let's say you came up with 3 channels that we'll use as an example. Maybe you want to do a blog and you want to have Instagram and you want to do a newsletter.
Okay.
So they're the channels you chose. If you only choose one, that's okay. I'll use 3 as an example. Now you know where that is. This is where you start your brainstorming process. So you're thinking about, okay, I have a topic hub here that might be Bobby websites. This is where you start using things like Google and Answer the Public to just start throwing keywords in there to see what people are actually asking about. You go into Facebook groups to see the questions people are asking, and you start listening to what people want to know about. And that is your brainstorming point where you get ideas about what you might want to share content about. So, for example, you might type how to start a website into Google. Now, immediately it's going to bring back other people's content, but it's also going to prompt you with questions that people are asking on the topic. Now, this is amazing gold nuggets. This is what people are asking about right now. So there, posing a question, you know that you can actually answer that question in a piece of content. However you want to order this, whether you want to put it on a Post-it note and start creating little options on the wall, or whether you want to use some sort of a system like Trello to capture your ideas, or Evernote, just start capturing those questions. And the more of those that you put together, it's quite easy because you start getting them all up in front of you and you can see, and there are going to be things that suddenly go and you'll go, okay, so people are saying, do I have to put my website on WordPress? Okay, that could be a really interesting article. Why don't I write an article going, should I use WordPress or Squarespace?
Yep.
It's a simple topic. For Bobby, it's aligning back to his goals. And of course, there's natural ways in there that you can then integrate things about the different things that you still have to put onto that website, whether you choose WordPress or Squarespace. And now that you've got an idea, you've decided that that's going to go, you put that on your list in your topic hub under websites, and treat that as an idea, not a final piece. That's when you do this thing that I call content atomization, which is a very pretentious term, I have to admit, for basically saying with that idea, before I even start, before I actually have anything, let me think about those channels that I want to put this idea into. So how would I put that idea in a blog? How would I put that idea? How would I want to send that out in my newsletter? And how would I make that work on Instagram? And the reason I ask you to do that is each of those channels is different. What you want to do right when you're creating is be thinking about the audience that you're going to reach in those 3 places so that your creation process doesn't get duplicated 3 times. As you're actually creating that core piece of content that you've made, you're also thinking about, okay, well, if I'm going to do this as a blog, I actually want to try and connect this over to another point so I'm keeping that person moving. I want to make sure that if I give them this information here on my blog, what they might see on my Instagram is slightly different. So it keeps them actually feeling there's a fresh touch point, that they've got something different at each point. And it's all happened in the one creation process. So it makes it a lot easier and it saves you an enormous amount of time.
Yeah. And I think a point on that I want to point out. So when you do that thinking and mapping, that's when you'll say, okay, this piece of content, I can link back to this other piece of content like Absolutely. I do when I reference old podcast episodes. It's the same kind of thing. But also I think this was kind of implicit in what Jillian was saying, but your channel and your primary channel is going to affect things, right? So if in a podcast, necessarily I'm not really going to, because I do these almost hour-long episodes, and this one's probably going to be longer than an hour, I don't address one question, right? I mean, I talk about multiple things. It's a bigger topic. If you're doing a blog post, you could very easily do a very simple blog post about, a simple question like what goes on your homepage of a website, right? That's something. But that would never be a whole, and I said, it could be a whole podcast episode, but I'm probably going to address more. So I think about that, but also a point that I want to make sure listeners get, and I want to get you to talk about this a little bit, Jillian, because it relates to what you said before. You don't always have to be selling. So your content on a topic doesn't always have to be about what you sell. So for example, I have website builders come on my podcast, and those episodes a lot of times don't even really talk about the legal stuff. But people who are interested in those podcasts would potentially need to talk to me and be interested in other stuff. So I call that Trojan horse marketing. Could you kind of talk about that a little bit more, Jillian?
Look, I love the way you call it Trojan horse, and I think that's really accurate. Ultimately, anything you're doing, I'm hoping that it doesn't have a hard sell really in there in terms of content, because it's just not necessary. It's exactly that. It's a Trojan horse. It's more about saying, I am going to give you incredibly valuable, informative information that you need and that you will find useful for what you're doing. And because of that, you've come into my world where you'll discover what I sell, what my products are, what everything else is. You've made it actually, it's genuine. It's got authority and trust to it because the person has come to you because of your authority on the topic, not because they want to buy something from you. Because as we know, most people don't buy things from people they don't know anyway, especially online, because they need to build that trust. So you don't need to actually go the hard sell. You need to make sure that whatever it is that you're selling is available. You don't want to hide it completely. Some people do. I know there's a lot of approaches where it's just, you can only buy something from me when I launch once or twice a year. Yeah. For most of us, that's probably not going to be applicable. We need something out there that's to some extent available to people, or probably a job by day to pay the bills. And it's about making it available to them. And, I think I saw a really fantastic stat the other day that 50% of people that reach your website are likely to be qualified as your potential customers. If you've done all this right, if you've attracted the right people, if you're creating the right content, 50% of them are qualified to buy from you, but won't do it at that point because it's not the right time for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, so I think when I was talking about Trojan Horse, I was talking more broadly, like I have an episode of this podcast, which is about the legal stuff. It's about the legal stuff that applies to your website. So it is very much my zone of genius, what I offer. I don't know if I even mention my templates in it, but it's that. But then I have stuff that literally is, I don't do anything. I can't build a website for you, but I had my website builder come on for an episode to talk about it because I think that's something my audience likes. And I think you can think about it, listeners, the same way. I mean, let's say you're a website builder. Well, you could have someone, you could have, content that's not strictly about that, but that's about, about plugins or that's about email lists or things like that are related that people will be interested in. So I guess that was what I meant. And I think people need to expand their horizons sometimes.
And I think, look, most of the content you are going to create is not something you're selling. Every piece of content you create to some extent is a Trojan horse because it is about offering that genuine value. But it also has this really nice flow behind it that is about problem, solution, problem, solution, problem, solution. As you actually guide people around your content universe, you are addressing their problem, solving their problem, but it naturally then connects them to the next step, which to some extent is another problem or need.
Yeah. Well, and another thing, so do you call it atomization? Is that what you're saying on your content? Yeah. Okay. So another example of this, and I think that's a point we need to make, is when you come up with a topic, think about all the different ways you can repurpose it. Think about all the different stuff you can do. So again, I have a podcast topic, but then I'm going to have an Instagram post about it. I'm going to have a Facebook post about it. I'm going to have some discussions in my Facebook group about it. So you think about all of that and map it all out. So it kind of all fits together.
It makes it really natural. So for example, if I'm writing a blog article, my favorite thing to do on Pinterest is 5 mistakes. 5 mistakes is a classic Pinterest click through. People love a mistake on Pinterest. Yeah. So when I'm actually, if I know that I'm going to be creating a pin out of this blog article that I'm writing, when I'm writing it, I'm actually incorporating into my content at some point, or I'm putting it into my subheadings, those 5 mistakes, so that I know I can actually create that pin on Pinterest and send it back to that blog article. And that's part of actually making sure that you're not getting into clickbait in the social as well. If you're going to put something out that says 5 mistakes that you're making on X, Y, and Z, when they click on that and go back, they've got to find the 5 mistakes.
Yeah, let's not do that classic office line. I've got a 3-step plan, but I'm only going to tell you if you hire me. Which, yeah, I mean, and I don't see a lot. I mean, clickbait people do that. Most people don't do that with their content, but, you really ought to provide value to people.
I think what they do is they miss out on opportunities in channels like Pinterest and Instagram, because they could be creating this really kind of engaging content on there that drives traffic, but the content that they created actually doesn't match what they need to create in that channel. So even though there's a synergy, it's not creating that natural progression forward. So when you do it at the beginning, when you actually think about what you're going to put in Pinterest or Instagram, you're actually making your life easier, because what you've done is actually said, I know exactly what they need to see in that channel to move them to this channel.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. So we've been going a long time, but I do want to ask you really quickly about...
I'm sure there's a good stripper story that you can cut out in the final edit.
No, that is staying in. That I may tell my podcast folks that needs to be my 45-second snippet, because come on, that's good clickbait. But no, I want to talk briefly about logistics, and I don't think you need to tell people how they should do the process of coming up with all the ideas. But how far out do you think people should be creating a content plan once they have their strategy?
I tend to personally follow about 12 weeks. That works for me. Again, I am a big advocate of supporting people in finding their own comfort space. from an efficiency point of view, if you want all the pieces to fit together and support each other, the further out you plan, the more there's going to be that natural fit where everything flows together. That's just sheer, we can't avoid that. For me, 12 weeks gives me time to batch my content. So it creates efficiency around the fact that I can get all of my pins done together and all my Insta posts done together. And that's just kind of smart planning. It also means that I can see that how those 12 pieces might actually fit together on my actual website. So I tend to blog is my thing. If I've done those 12 pieces at that planning point, I'm looking at the 12 pieces and thinking, okay, well, that piece relates to that piece. I'm going to have an internal link between there and there. So just having that look forward helps you create those journeys. And that's the one thing. If you get one thing from this, I want people to be always thinking about that forward momentum, that looping that's going on, that everything you're doing, really ask yourself. I have an Excel document I do this in, and one of my categories is next step. And against every piece of content I create, I put at least one next step that it helps them naturally move forward to the next piece of value that they're going to get.
Yeah. And I mean, I think some of this needs to be a little bit of common sense comes in. And what I mean by that is, if you have a podcast and you're interviewing people, you probably need to have a plan a little bit further out, right? Because you need to get people, you need to find a guest for the topic. You need to get it booked. You need to get it scheduled. You need to do it. So that's going to be different than if it's all just you, right? I mean, you can create your own content. I mean, my podcast editor wants the content a week before it comes out, but I could theoretically record an episode 1 week in advance and have it out. But if I want to have a guest, I can't do that. I mean, I've got to do planning. So,
I in my last corporate job, I had a podcast we ran, and this was probably the one thing that drove me a little bit crazy with our, editor there, or a sort of producer who did all the recording, is he just wouldn't batch them. So we were always in this constant state of stress and it affects the entire process. So, if you're getting the podcast delivered at the last minute, that's also the person that's creating the newsletter update that's going out, and the person that's creating the social media pieces that are going out. The more you actually batch them together and go, okay, well, if we did say 4 or 6 of them at one time, they're actually going to be really efficiently moving through all of the different people that have to support that process. And, hopefully as you get bigger, you will have people supporting that process, not just doing it yourself. And that actually makes it work better, and you produce better content because you're not stressing out and doing it at the last minute. And I can promise you, no matter how much you think you can do it, and I'm a copywriter by trade, I produce copy fast. I can write 1,000 to 1,500 words in an hour quite easily. They're not good. They're never good. It's the piece that I have, done the first hour on, let it rest, had a think about, looked at other pieces that I'm writing at the same time and thought, do these really connect together? Are they working? When you give it that space of a bit of forward planning, it's like anything, if you're going to put a great bottle of wine down to rest for a while, it's going to be better after time.
Yeah. So I think that's great advice. So with that, I am going to wrap things up.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I mean, we got to end it sometime or we can keep talking forever.
I know. It's a bit long. It's gone on a while.
Yeah. But so, Jillian, one thing I like to ask my guests, as you know, is what is something that listeners could do, just kind of a bite-sized thing, 5 minutes a day, or get it done by the end of the week, maybe, that could help them move their business forward. And with you, obviously, I'm talking about for you, their content strategy. So what would you suggest that listeners do? What steps could they get done in bite-sized tidbits?
Look, probably the one thing that you could do is actually just, I don't know if I can give you 5 minutes on content. That's a tough one. I have to admit.
It's either 5 minutes or by the end of the week. So you're probably going to go with it by the end of the week.
Okay. One thing you could do right now that I actually think would make a huge difference. I want to give you 2 things, and I think they won't take long. Number one, have a look at, if you're creating content right now, have a look at it and say, what is my number one product or service? And am I putting that front and center into my thinking when I'm creating content? That's going to take you 5 minutes. Because it's an easy question it's a hard question to answer because you probably won't want to answer it honestly to start with, as Bobby didn't. Ask yourself that question. And then what I want you to do is really think, okay, the first step I can take to do this is come up with 3 hubs for your content. That then align back to those goals. I'm presuming you've got some goals. If you don't have some goals, that's a whole different conversation we're going to have. But
yeah, if that's the case, go back to my planning episodes. I'll have links in the show notes.
Yeah, please do. And if you don't have goals, the one thing I will say to you, here's a quick way to have 3 goals. Have one goal around that product that you know is really easy for people to buy from you. Have another goal around awareness and have another goal around engagement.
Yep.
There's your starting point.
Yep. Perfect. So I love it.
So do that. Make sure that your goal, number 1 goal, which has to be to make money, guys. We're in this to do this to make money. Mm-hmm. So think about that. Make sure it's aligned to the content you're creating, and then break it down into a couple of 3, maybe it's a good starting point, topic hubs. And these are just like I said with a newspaper. They're the very top line description: news, sport, features, cartoons. And think about that. If that's there, not only have you got a plan that you can start working towards, you've also got a structure to actually put on your website.
And I think that's perfect. And that's a perfect ending place. Jillian, thank you. This has been fantastic. I think, I probably don't say that. I've never said this before, but I think this has been the best, most action-packed episode yet of my podcast. So I want to say thank you. It's been fantastic.
Oh, Bobby, that means the world to me. You know how passionate I am about this subject. I think Bobby may just be the one person that has inspired me most to see how people can actually embrace these ideas of creating this, because I just want to see people having content that actually drives their business forward. Because you know what? There are big companies out there that are earning millions and millions of dollars out of being clever with their content. And it's not rocket science behind it. You can do it too.
And listeners, just so you know, Jillian is also the person who kicked me in the behind to get my social strategy. So I'm going to do my best to drag her back on here to talk about having a social media strategy, because I just think she's brilliant. And quite honestly, she's fun to talk to. So hopefully she'll be back. But Jillian, how can my listeners find you, get into your world so that they can start getting into your loops and all the incredible value you provide?
Number 1, thank you, Bobby. I think you're the best as well. So we're each other's big fan clubs there. I blog at the moment, is my main thing that you can reach. It's called digitaldecluttered.com. That's a great place to start because you'll find all of my different content on there. I am actually going through a process of finally working on coming out of my introvert shell and starting to brand things in my own name. But digitaldecluttered.com is the best place to come and reach out and say hello to me. And then you'll see all my social media links. Feel free to come and ask me a question yourself if you'd like to.
And she's too nice to promote it, but she's just now, as we're recording this, launching a course about content strategy. I'm in it. I mean, I think I already have this nailed, but I'm in it. I'm going to enjoy it. And I'm going to report back to you. She's in beta testing, I think, right now. But I think, in the long term, if you guys are looking for a social strategy and a course to understand it, I think Jillian's going to be the place to go. So, Jillian, thank you again.
Well, it's been so much fun, and I will be back anytime.
Well, so that's it. Now, listeners, you know what I'm going to say now. Don't forget to go join the Online Genius community by heading over to youronlinegenius.com/community. That's where we will talk about these things more. If you're in it, by the way, I had a video lesson, kind of a Q&A with Jillian. So you'll see her in there. And I think she'll be around every once in a while to provide some advice. So it's a great place to connect with me, to connect with Jillian, and really get kind of deeper on these topics. So that's my call to action to you, other than following Jillian and getting into her world. So that's it for this episode of the Online Genius Podcast. I will talk to you again next week.
Thanks for listening to the Online Genius Podcast. Make sure to tune in next week for more great tips, tricks, and strategies to help you build and protect your online genius.